Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl, aka Artsy Island Girl for Pajama Crafter Stamps. And today I'm sharing a Jawsome Pendulum card. This fun card is so simple to make and it has some great movement. It's using the Happy Flappy stamp set from Pajama Crafter Stamps. There's several different images you can pick and choose here, and there's lots of different sentiments. I'm going to be using a combination of sentiments to do the hey chum, and then the word your, and then the word Jawsome. So first thing I do when I have a clear set of stamps is I use a white eraser on the stamping surface. It removes any possible manufacturing residue and helps that stamp take ink a little bit better. I only do this one time when I first use the stamp set. It doesn't need to be done multiple times, and then it is ready to use. I'm going to use some holographic paper from the Metallic Medley Card Panels pack. I'm going to use this for the shark. I thought it would be a great way to give it some shine and a really easy way to add a different texture to the front of the card. I'm using some embossing powder tool on that cardstock. I want to heat emboss it with some black embossing powder so we have that raised image or that raised line on there. You could, if you want, use like Stays On ink and use a permanent ink on there and let that dry. But I always love the look that heat embossing gives, and it's really quite easy to do. So after putting the embossing powder tool on there and stamping with the embossing ink, I use some superfine embossing powder on that stamped image. If by chance the embossing powder sticks somewhere where you don't want it to go, you can use your finger or a small brush to rub it away before doing your heat embossing. And then you need to use an embossing tool to melt that powder on there. After letting that cool for just a few seconds, I use a detailed scissors to fussy cut around it. I'm going just right outside that heat embossing so that we still have that nice line around it. When I'm doing my fussy cutting, I don't move the scissors too much. I move the cardstock. This is the best way to get nice results when you're doing your fussy cutting, is to move the cardstock instead of the scissors. So my scissors might move a little bit left to right, but in general, it doesn't move too much. I'm using my left hand in order to position that cardstock under the blade of those scissors. This is, again, the best way to get a nice clean result when you're doing your fussy cutting. So as I'm doing it too, I also cut off any excess cardstock. So once I got around the shark and got most of that excess cut through, if you will, I cut that right off so that I have a smaller piece of cardstock that I have in my hand that I'm moving around. So here's the finished product. I love the holographic finish to the shark. If you don't have holographic cardstock, you could just use your favorite cardstock and either watercolor the shark or color it with Copics or dye-based markers or your favorite type of coloring. But I just thought it was a perfect time to use that holographic paper for something that I don't necessarily normally use it. I don't usually use holographic paper with stamped images, but I thought it was perfect for that shark. I have some cardstock for the background of my card. I'm going to do some ink blending on it. But before I do that ink blending, I want to stamp and emboss those sentiments. So I'm using my stamp positioner here to position those sentiments. So I have that Hello Chum at the top. I'm going to heat emboss that first. And then when that is done, I'm going to heat emboss the Your Jawsome part at the bottom. That way I can make sure each one is perfect as I'm doing it, and I don't have to worry too much about the other sentiments. I can just concentrate on one at a time. I'm heat embossing them with the same black embossing powder that I used for the shark. You could also change this to white embossing powder if you wanted it to be a little bit brighter on the ink blended background. I thought the black tied in really nicely with the black outlines for the shark, so that's why I kept it with that. When it comes time to inking the sentiments at the bottom, I'm being very careful to only ink the Your part of the upper sentiment and then the entire sentiment for Jawsome. So what you can't see here on the screen is as I'm inking them, I'm looking to the side of my ink pad and the stamp so that I can pay attention to where that edge of that ink pad is and make sure that I'm only inking the parts of the stamp that I want. Now, because that Your is part of a different sentence and I only want the one word, I don't want to accidentally ink blend or ink the other letters to that sentiment. So I am being very careful when I'm doing that. Once I'm done this, I am trimming this down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to have a black mat around the outside of this that's going to be trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I wanted that black as well so that it coordinated with the black heat embossing for the sentiment as well as the shark. Another option would be to use that holographic cardstock as the mat. However, I thought that might take some attention away from the shark, so I opted not to do that. I have 3 different distressings here that I'm using for my background. I have some tumbled glass, broken china, and then I'm going to do Uncharted Mariner at the bottom. So I'm starting where it's light at the top and then dark towards the bottom. I want it to look like we have more of a light source towards the top, and then the water gets darker as you get a little bit deeper. So I did that whole surface with the tumbled glass. Now I'm going in with the broken china. I'm using nice large blending brushes here that are perfect for backgrounds. Now when I do my ink blending, I, on purpose, have some areas that are lighter, some areas that are darker. Personally, I think it looks visually more interesting. I like it that way, and I do it that way on purpose. If you want, you can easily do it completely even all the way across. But again, I think it looks a little bit more interesting this way. So this is what I opted to do. Now I wanted to have it looking like we have some light rays coming from the top, but I wanted them to also shimmer like water shimmers. So I'm using a natural pearl pad here. This has a little bit of a white haze to it, but it also has some shimmer. I have a scrap piece of paper that I'm using for those rays of light. I started kind of in the middle of the card, and then as I do each one, I'm going to have them kind of starting from the same-ish area, and then like light rays do, going out to give the look of light rays to it. And you can use as much or as little ink as you want. You could even use a white ink pad if you preferred. I didn't necessarily want streaks of white in here. I wanted to still see that blue underneath there. So that's why I opted for this one. It's going to give that white haze to it. It's also going to have a little bit of shimmer, give it something to catch the light, but it gives that background a little bit more interest as well. For my shark here, I want to create a pendulum mechanism. So I have a tiny circle die here. I'm going to use something called a snap and slide for the mechanism. And this particular circle die is the perfect size for that. So I chose to put that where I want the center of the shark's body to be. And I taped it in place with some tacky tape that can come off really easily, and die cut that and then took that off. Then I'm going to put those snap and slides in place. They just snap together really easily, and it just swivels on there. So you could do spinner cards with this as well. I'm going to create a pendulum mechanism so that shark moves, but it has some limit to that movement. I'm using a sticky spot to stick that onto the mechanism, and then using my tape to just tape it in place. I want to make sure when I'm creating the pendulum on the back of the card that my shark is in position on the front and it's not going to move. I'm taking a scrap piece of cardstock here and cutting a 1/2 inch strip, and then I just use my fingers to measure how long I want this pendulum to be. For this particular one, it ends up being 2.5 inches. So I cut that strip to 2.5 inches in length. Then I put a sticky spot on the back of that snap and slide, as well as at the bottom of the cardstock strip. I'm going to use a little tiny washer in order to give that pendulum some weight. And as I'm doing that, you can see I regularly flip it over to the front to make sure that my shark hasn't accidentally moved on me. To make space for this pendulum, I'm going to be using some foam tape on the back, and I want to make sure that that pendulum part, that little piece of cardstock, doesn't wedge itself into the foam tape. So I just use my scissors to curve around that piece there. Now my foam tape is double thick. You need to make sure that it's thicker than that snap and slide. You can easily double your foam tape if yours isn't as thick as this. It's easy enough to do. Just put your layer of foam tape on, take that backing off, and then add another layer on top of that. So if you don't happen to have tape that's really thick, that's an easy way to create it. I'm creating a barrier around my piece here. I want to make sure that it's well supported, the card front. And I'm also making sure that I have the movement that I want for my pendulum. I've made these many times. So for this particular one, I wanted there to be about 1/2 inch on the each side of that pendulum for it to swing. That's where I put my foam tape. Now I have my black piece of cardstock here, and I'm just trimming that down to the 4 inches by 5.25 inches, and we're ready to assemble our card. So you can see that pendulum mechanism is really quite easy to do. And it's perfect for when you want a card that has some movement to it, but you don't necessarily want that movement to be spinny. You want it to have some limited movement to it. So I glued my mat down onto the front of my card, and then I'm going to glue this front here. Now, once again, that tape that I was using wasn't really sticking. It's one that I used a lot, so it just didn't really have much stick left. So I tossed that away and then put that back, or put some new tape onto that shark. I want to make sure it doesn't move on me. I don't want to accidentally tape that pendulum underneath the foam. So until I have this stuck to the front of the card, I want to make sure that that doesn't move. So I take the backing off of that foam tape, and then I can put it right onto my card front. Now, when I'm putting it onto the card front, I'm kind of hovering on top of that card and then looking from above to make sure that I have that mat nice and even around it. So here is our pendulum, and you could leave it at this point, but I thought it would be fun to add some gems around the shark, kind of like water bubbles. So this is the Breakfast at Tea's mixed embellishment package. They come in a few different sizes. I'm just using my liquid glue here in order to put them on that back. So I have a cluster of 3 towards the top right, and then a cluster of 3 towards the bottom left, and then a cluster of 2 towards the top left, and then same for the bottom right. So I'm using a jewel positioner in order to place those gems on top, and I am trying to make sure that I have in the clusters different sizes to make it look a little bit more interesting. The larger sizes are closer to the shark, the smaller sizes are moving away from the shark. This is just going to give that background a little bit of texture, a little bit of extra sparkle, and then I let that completely dry, and here is our finished card. Really quite a simple design, but that shark with that holographic paper is really eye-catching, and I love the movement it gives, and that movement is limited by that foam tape, so you don't have to worry about it spinning around or having to position it. And this type of mechanism works so well for so many different themes. You could have it as a boat rocking in the water. You could have anything that you think that would be great rocking back and forth. It would be perfect for. You'll find all the supplies that I've used listed and linked down in the description below. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it and hope you have a fantastic day.